This one isn't about a single person, but a group of people who were involved in what could possibly be one of the most shocking trials to ever take place in Scotland. A trial which revolved around one of the strangest conflicts that's ever happened in Scotland. A conflict which turned a familiar sound, which would usually bring joy and happiness to people when they could hear it approaching, into a sound that would cause the people of Glasgow to run inside and lock their doors. The Ice Cream War. In the 1980s, in the East End of Glasgow, ice cream vans were very common sights in all of the housing schemes, and you would always have children pouring out of the houses and sprinting towards them with great big smiles on their faces. You would also get the absolute prick children who would grab every copper that they had, not bother to count it, and annoy the absolute shit out of the driver by walking up to him and saying, "What can I get for this?" That was me. I was that child, and he fucking hated me. I hereby formally apologise to the Forest and Muriel van of Coatbridge for being that kid, but not you, Mr. Whippy. For those of you that don't know, a 99 is a cone with a flake in it. It's called a 99 because it cost 99p, but when you went to Mr. Whippy, he charged you £2.50. It's not a 99 then, is it, you fucking robber? But I digress. Glasgow ice cream vans sold everyone's favourites. Dolly mixtures, neon nerds, dip dabs, fags. There is a lot of money to be made in selling these Scottish staples, but there is even more money to be made in selling the #1 Scottish staple: heroin. Crime families realised that ice cream vans were the perfect way to sell drugs and stolen goods. They were very unlikely to get pulled over, they could travel all over the place, and money exchanging hands at an ice cream van wouldn't arouse suspicion. The police would just think the man was buying a Dolly mixture, although instead of there being penny sweets in the bag, it was smack. However, as with all criminal enterprises, territorial disputes are bound to take place, but a lot of these territorial disputes didn't even happen with rival gangs. A lot of them happened with innocent family-owned ice cream vans. If a rival, non-criminal ice cream van came into an area that it wasn't supposed to be in, the gangs would use some kind of basic methods to sort of harass them out of the area.
Eventually, I think after about a week, there was a third van brought in permanently, and his job was to follow me, and whenever I stopped, for him to stop, to take as much business away from me as possible.
But if they didn't take the hint and they kept coming back into the area, the gangs would then adopt some harsher methods.
Smashing windows, like letting tires down, maybe without hole in the side, you know what I mean? It's going to cost them enough money to get back on the road again, if they could get back on the road again. But it seemed to most interest. They wouldn't come back in the scheme again. It cost them too much.
The point was to make the repairs to the vans so costly that they would just stop coming back into the area. Also, imagine your title being Convicted Van Smasher. But if those methods didn't work, the gangs would then go for the direct approach.
I didn't realise there was a threat until such times as my ice cream van had been 3 men or 4 men had stopped in a car in front of it, jumped out and smashed the windscreen with baseball bats.
The ice cream war became such a cult phenomenon that it was even getting referenced in pop culture. It was actually the basis for a movie that came out in 1984 called Comfort and Joy, which is a story about a famous DJ who finds himself accidentally involved in the ice cream war.
It's you, innit? It's Dickie Bird. Dickie Bird's here. For God's sake, get in the car. Give us an autograph, Dickie.
I'm sorry, I don't have a pen on me, I'm sorry.
Come on to hell, let's get out of here. Give us a dedication at least, for my mother.
Yeah, sure.
Tomorrow morning.
Right.
You're in Mantovani or Dean Mark.
Oh, bound to. What, memories are made of this or something?
Aye, lovely.
I kind of want to include this just because it's a little bit funny, but here's a little piece of dank lore about a specific scene in this movie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See her? That's my mum. That actually is my mum. The ice cream war continued for many years, and van smashings and attacks just became very commonplace in Glasgow. But there was one person who held his ground against the gangs, and that was Andrew Fatboy Doyle. He refused to be intimidated, and he actually fought back against the gangs any time they tried to attack his van. But one night in February of 1984, a group of men wearing balaclavas pulled up next to his ice cream van and blasted through the front window with a sawn-off shotgun. Doyle survived the attack, and he continued to take his van on the route because he refused to be intimidated. But unfortunately, the worst was yet to come. On the 16th of April 1984, a group of men approached the front door of Doyle's flat, covered it in petrol, and set it on fire, starting a huge blaze that trapped Doyle and his family inside, and they couldn't escape. Andrew Doyle was killed in the blaze, along with 5 members of his family, one of whom was an 18-month-old baby. This event was referred to as the ice cream murders, and it absolutely shocked the nation, and the police ended up interviewing over 1,500 people to try and get any leads on who could have started the fire, but despite their best efforts, they weren't getting any leads on any suspects. But then, a man called William Love, who was being held in Berlin prison on suspicion of armed robbery, came forward saying that he had information on who started the fire. William Love told the police that he had been drinking in the Netherfield bar one night when he overheard a group of men concocting a plan to get rid of Andrew Doyle, and they arrived at the conclusion of setting his flat on fire. Love then gave the police the 2 names of the leaders of this group, Thomas T.C. Campbell and Joseph Steele. Love gave a statement containing all of this information over to the police, and then he signed it. And despite Love being held in prison for a particularly violent armed robbery, after giving this statement, he was immediately released. Then another man came forward, called Joseph Granger, and he told police that he was actually with TC and Joseph on the night of the fire, and he was acting as lookout, and he gave a signed statement over to police containing all of this information. But despite him admitting his part in a serious murder plot of this magnitude, once he handed his statement over to the police, he was immediately released too. This is starting to get my noggin jogging a little. The police then arrested all of the men that the witnesses identified, primarily TC and Joseph. But this is where things start to get a little bit strange. When TC was being arrested by the police, he apparently said to them, "I only wanted a van window shot up. The fire at Fatboy's was only meant to be a frightener." And this infamous phrase that he apparently said to the police was one of the prime pieces of evidence used against him. The police also found a map of the street where the fire happened in TC's house, and on the back of the map there was TC and his wife's handwriting where they had been playing a word game together. What is strange about both of these things though is TC was no stranger to trouble. He had been in trouble with the police so many times before. He was actually quite a well-seasoned criminal, so it's pretty strange that he would say such an incriminating phrase right in front of the police. He also wouldn't be stupid enough to leave such a prime piece of evidence like a map of the area where the crime took place just lying out in the open in his house. And even stranger than that, TC's wife, who was actually present when he was being arrested, said that he never said that infamous phrase. Those words never came out of his mouth. She also questioned the map itself. She said that she had no idea about that map, and she had no idea about the apparent word game her and TC had been playing on the back, because she said that her and TC had never ever played a word game before in their life. When Joseph Steele, another seasoned criminal, was being arrested, he apparently said to the police, "I'm not the one that lit the match." And this incriminating phrase that he apparently said was used as evidence against him. It's really, really strange that these seasoned criminals would just say such incriminating things to the arresting officers, isn't it? It kind of feels like these cops were setting something up, but benefit of the doubt, boys, benefit of the doubt. One would not want to suggest that our boys in blue would pull some sketchy stuff. Perish the thought. They were both charged with the 6 murders, and so started the trial of TC and Steele. And would you believe that even from there, things got even stranger? Especially with William Love, who appeared as a witness in the trial. When he was being quizzed about the date of which the supposed conversation happened that he overheard in the Netherfield bar, he couldn't give a specific date. In fact, the date that he gave kept changing. But the thing that really convinced everyone that something funny was going on was when Joseph Granger was brought to the stand as a witness. Joseph just dropped a bombshell on the entire court by saying that the entire statement that he signed was completely made up by the police. None of those words came out of his mouth, and the only reason he signed the statement is because the cops were intimidating him into signing it. They basically said to him, "You're going to sign this statement that we've made up, or we're going to pin the murders on you." Obviously, everyone in the trial was pretty shocked by this. So Granger's testimony was completely thrown out, and the only thing the prosecution had to go on was William Love's testimony. And so the jury were sent away to make their decision. And after 2 days, the jury came back with the decision of guilty. And both TC and Steele were sentenced to life in prison. Both men constantly professed their innocence, pointing out some of the suspicious things that happened during the trial, as well as the inconsistencies with the police's evidence.
I said to the judge, I said, "You've sentenced me to life for a crime I never done." And he just looked at us, but deep down I was wanting to scream. This can't be happening. This isn't right. Nobody wins here. There's no winners, there's no victors here. The Doyle family are dead. The innocent are locked in prison. Their families have suffered. The Doyle families have suffered. And the public have been robbed of justice.
TC went on hunger strike several times as a protest, and on a few occasions he was actually severely beaten by the guards. Fortunately for TC, he took the prison service to civil court over the beatings that he got, and he actually managed to win financial compensation. Joseph Steele was a bit more of a showman when it came to claiming his innocence. He managed to escape from prison on 3 occasions, and on one of these occasions he managed to handcuff and glue himself to the gates of Buckingham Palace to bring attention to his wrongful conviction. The police cut him free and he was immediately taken back to prison. The two men just sort of had to accept that they were just going to have to stay in prison for the rest of their lives over a crime that they claim they never committed. And many, many years pass, and more eyes start to look at the case, and that is when people start to notice even more suspicious things. Now I know your noggin is already jogging because I can hear the pitter-patter of Nike Air Maxes hitting the ground. Well, your noggin is about to be sprinting like Usain Bolt. For example, Joseph Granger, who claimed out loud in court that the statement that he signed was completely false and made up by the police, and he only signed it because he was being threatened by the police.
I just remember one day he came home and it was late on, and he told me they ended up signing a statement that they had made because they threatened him that they would charge him with the Doyle murders and he would get 30 years.
God should strike me down dead. On any of my family's life, that is the truth. I never even heard of the Doyles. Never, there's certainly nothing whatsoever to do with it. Do you know what I mean? It's crazy, it's as if it's somebody else. Do you know what I mean? You know what's been going on all these years.
You told the police that you were with Campbell and Steele at the Doyles, were you?
I never told the police that. The police told me that. It's a big difference.
Well, it wasn't just him that happened to. The cops also threatened his girlfriend with the same thing.
I didn't want to change my statement. Then when the police arrived, they told me that if I never changed my statement, they were taking Joe away and he'd be charged with the Doyle murders and he would get 30 years in prison.
And you changed your statement?
They handed me a piece of paper with the statement written and told me to sign it.
Right after Granger stated out loud in court that the entire statement was false, shocking everyone. See as Granger tried to leave the courthouse right after he was finished, he was grabbed at the front door by the cops, arrested and charged with perjury, and he was given 5 years in prison for that. Kind of feels like someone wanted to shut him up. But the strangest thing was the primary piece of evidence that TC and Steele's conviction was based on, and that was the testimony of William Love. We already know that Love's testimony is a bit unreliable because he kept giving different dates to when he supposedly overheard that infamous conversation in the Netherfield bar. But here's the strange thing. When Love gave his statement, he was already in prison on suspicion of armed robbery. And when he was arrested for this, as you do, he gave an alibi. So he told the police a detailed description of all of his activities over a 3-day period to prove that he had nothing to do with the armed robbery. So Love gets arrested on suspicion of armed robbery, and then he gives the police a detailed description of all of his activities over a period of 3 days. Love then gets held in prison on suspicion of armed robbery. And then a little while later, Love approaches the police again, saying that he has information on who started the fire. And in his statement that he gave to the police during this time, he gives a specific date on which he heard the conversation in the Netherfield bar. The funny thing is, that specific date that he gave was also one of the dates in the 3-day period that Love gave in his original alibi. There's no mention whatsoever of Love being in or even anywhere near a bar. So what's happened there? Is he lying in his alibi, or is he lying in the new statement? Why would you leave out something as innocuous as simply being in a bar having a pint in your alibi? Surely it would be completely safe to include something like that. I think someone might be lying somewhere. But why would he do that? Why would he just make something up? But it turns out that there was a third statement made by Love and presented to the police, giving yet another different date as to when he apparently overheard the conversation. But the problem with this statement was, on the date that Love gave, Love was actually in prison for a separate offence. So it would have been impossible for Love to have been in any bar because he was in prison. And surely this third statement would have been something amazing for the defence to use to prove that Love was full of shit and he could not be relied on as a witness. But this statement was never given to the defence. This statement was not discovered until 12 years later in a filing cabinet when it could have changed the outcome of the entire trial. Another thing to note about Love is on 3 separate occasions he has been convicted for perverting the course of justice. So the man is not just a serial liar, he's a convicted serial liar. Why was Love coming forward and giving all this information? I mean, it's not like he was involved in the ice cream war in any way. Or was he?
What do you know about who the man was with the firearm?
It was my brother, William Love.
Billy Love?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know it was him? Had he given you any indication that he might be doing that?
Yeah, because he brought the gun into the house that evening. And I said to him, what are you going to do with that, Billy? And he says, I'm going to shoot Jimmy Mitchell's ice cream van just to frighten him. Not to harm anybody, just to frighten him.
Oh, so it turns out it was Love who did the shotgun attack. So it seems that Love doesn't just have an armed robbery hanging over his head, but given the evidence of him carrying out the shotgun attack, that is a motive, so the police could very easily pin the murders on Love, and a man who lies as much as him might resort to doing some shady shit to get himself out of that situation. Well, everyone's favourite convicted van smasher, who was actually in prison with Love at the time, might be able to shine a little bit of light on this.
Frank Falloon said Love had told him at the time that the police had offered him a deal on the armed robbery charge.
Yeah, that was the bottom line. That if he would go along with what the police told him, then the charges against him on armed robbery would be dropped. I told him he was playing with fire and he was going to get bumped. But Billy's not a man for listening. His first intentions is freedom, regardless of the cost. As long as he's out the door, doesn't matter. Consequences don't matter. He'd been through all procedures, a bail, refused on all conditions. One morning, a pal of mine came down for the top flat in our hall and told me Burla Love was going out on bail. That only meant one thing, that he'd accepted a deal and the police offered him.
It's really starting to look like Love was very desperate for his freedom, and the police were in desperate need of a very good liar who would say anything that they told him to and sign any statement that they put down in front of him in exchange for their freedom. The cops obviously deny giving Love a deal.
The High Court refused bail to someone who's charged with armed robbery on the basis that he's too dangerous to inflict upon the public. And all of a sudden the prosecuting authorities who were opposing his bail withdraw that opposition. That's a deal. It has to be a deal. There's no other word for it.
Just got a big think. I'm having the biggest think right now, boys. I've got a big think! But then, many years later, investigators actually managed to track down William Love, who was living in a houseboat on the Thames.
I was responsible for the shooting of the van, yeah.
Why did you do that? Were you acting on instructions?
No, I was not for Tommy Campbell, that's for sure, but I ain't stating who gave me the instructions, but I can state it wasn't from Tommy Campbell, yeah.
But you went out in the Volvo?
That's right.
With the balaclava?
Yeah.
With the shotgun?
Yeah.
And your sister saw you?
My sister saw me from the window.
Reason 3, Love is still admitting he lied at the trial of Campbell and Steele. Did you hear any conversation about any firebombing in the Netherfield pub on March 23rd?
Never in my life, mate. I've never heard anybody discussing anything about fires in my life, mate.
How about in the Netherfield shortly after the weekend of April 7th?
Never, mate. It was never discussed, man.
In any other pub did you hear people discussing
it? It was fabricated information, mate. It was never said at all whatsoever.
In any other pub
never,
at any
other
time?
pub, never in my life has it been said. Never.
Where did it all come from, that story, then?
You tell me, mate.
You dirty, dirty, dirty bastard. I think we can establish at this point that Love completely lied to secure his own freedom, and he was quite happy to send a bunch of innocent people down for life if it meant he could save his own skin. Given Love's confession, the investigators handed this footage over to TC and Steele's lawyers, who then immediately submitted for another appeal. So after serving 12 years in prison, TC and Steele were released, but only pending an appeal. And they were not out of the woods yet. The appeal court ruled that Love's testimony, the primary thing that TC and Steele were convicted on, was inaccurate. So they ruled it was inaccurate. And despite that, the appeal court upheld their convictions and sent them back to prison. Just what the fuck, man? What the fuck? However, finally, in 2004, Justice Clerk Lord Gill said that new evidence brought forward questioning the credibility of the police testimony could not allow him to let the convictions stand, and so he quashed both of their convictions and they were released after being wrongfully imprisoned for 20 years. If you want to have a more in-depth look at what actually happened to TC Campbell and Joseph Steele and what they got up to after prison, James English actually has full interviews with both of them on his podcast where they go into more detail about their sentences and the things that happened to them. I'll put links to that down below. It's a pretty sad story. A whole family were murdered. 2 men lost 20 years of their lives. And the people who did it have still never been caught. And this is seen as one of the darkest days in the history of Scottish justice. And here I was complaining about nearly getting a year. What can I get for this? Why do I never think these things through?
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody should subscribe.